The earth had changed. No longer a world of fire, no longer a world of water. Now, it was something more. A planet in balance, a planet in motion, a planet ready. But for billions of years, something was still missing. There were oceans, vast, deep, dark, in constant motion. There were continents, unstable, newly formed, still transforming. There was energy, everywhere, in the lightning that crossed the sky, in the heat rising from the depths, in reactions that never stopped. There were elements, atoms born in stars, mixed, rearranged, endlessly interacting. Everything was there, everything required, and yet, nothing was alive. No movement with purpose, no direction, no intention, no awareness, just matter, endless, silent, without direction, a world active on the outside, but empty within, but deep beneath the oceans, far from the light, far from the storms above, in places no eye would ever see. Something was happening, something small, almost imperceptible, invisible, but inevitable. At the bottom of the oceans, where the crust slowly opened, where heat escaped from Earth's interior, hydrothermal vents released constant energy, jets of superheated water, rich in minerals, extreme environments, but incredibly fertile. There, matter and energy met without rest. Simple molecules from different parts of the planet began to meet, to collide, to combine, to transform. Chemical reactions unfolded continuously, without pause, without control, without intention. Most of these combinations were unstable. They disappeared almost instantly, falling apart, reforming, disappearing again. A continuous cycle, attempts without memory, without permanence, but not all. Some structures, by chance, lasted a little longer. They resisted, they remained, and that was enough, because for the first time, matter was no longer just existing. It was beginning to persist, to hold form, even if only briefly. And then, these structures began to interact, to influence one another, to create new possibilities. The process repeated, again, and again, and again, without awareness, without intention, but with consequences. Energy drove everything. The environment shaped everything. The laws of nature guided everything. And slowly, very slowly, something began to change. Some structures became more stable, more resistant, more capable of continuing to exist, not by choice, but by necessity, by simple chemical survival. And then, something even more extraordinary happened. Certain molecules began to guide the formation of others, acting as templates, repeating patterns, preserving structure. For the first time, information began to exist, not as thought, not as consciousness, but as pattern, as repetition, as continuity. And that changed everything. Because now, it was no longer just matter reacting. It was matter beginning to replicate. Imperfect, unstable, but real. Each repetition brought variation. Small differences. Most failed, disappeared, but some persisted. And those differences began to matter, because some structures were more stable, more efficient, more enduring, and without any intention, a process had begun. Selection. What could persist, continued. What could not, disappeared. An invisible filter, relentless, silent, always acting. Over time, this process created something new, something more complex. Molecules began organizing into systems, interacting together, sharing roles, forming networks. And then, something critical happened. Some of these structures formed a boundary, a separation, a primitive membrane, a barrier between inside and outside. For the first time, something had an inside, a protected space, separated from the chaos around it. Inside that boundary, reactions became more stable, more continuous, more organized. This small internal world changed everything, because now, structures were no longer fully exposed. They could persist, they could evolve, and then, at some point, after millions of attempts, failures, transformations, it happened. Something that had never happened before. A structure capable of maintaining itself, capable of interacting with the environment, capable of using energy, capable of replicating, continuously, imperfectly, but undeniably. The first cell, simple, microscopic, invisible, but revolutionary. For the first time, something did not just exist, something lived. And in that moment, without sound, without light, without witnesses, the universe changed forever. Because from that point on, matter was no longer alone. Now, it could grow, adapt, transform, and evolve. That tiny cell carried within it something extraordinary, the potential of everything, every form of life that would ever exist, every ocean filled with creatures, every forest, every animal, every human being, every thought, every memory, everything began there, in the silent darkness of a primordial ocean. Over billions of years, that small spark would multiply, diversify, transform, giving rise to entire worlds of life, until it became aware, until it began to question, until it looked back, trying to understand where it came from, and perhaps what it is. Because in the end, this is not just the story of Earth, not just the story of life. It is our story, the story of everything. But that was only the beginning, because the first cell did not change the world overnight. It had to survive. It had to adapt. It had to face a planet, still hostile, unstable, unforgiving. And in the next video, you will witness how life learned to exist in a world without oxygen, how it survived extreme conditions, how it transformed the planet itself, and how, step by step, it became something far more complex. Entire worlds will emerge and disappear. The Earth will freeze. Life will almost come to an end. And then, it will explode into forms never seen before. This is not just evolution. This is the story of survival against impossible odds. This is the story of everything. And Season 2 begins now.